Welcome to a special edition of the Family Pulpit podcast. This is a kind of a new segment, new format that I want to try out. It's called Notes from the Pulpit. And what I want to do with this kind of podcast is I want to take a little bit more time, go a little bit more in depth, and provide some foundational information or discussion on what we'll be discussing in future podcasts. And then I may also go on the tail end too. So for instance, if we do a podcast that maybe sparks a little bit more discussion, we'll supplement that with the Notes from the Pulpit edition. This is me flying solo. Normally it's me and my son, the co-host, for the main podcast of the Family Pulpit podcast. But in this one, I'm going to be going by myself. And what I wanted to talk about is kind of lay the foundation for an upcoming episode that we're going to be discussing work. And in doing so, I'd say probably, the past 2 years or so, I've been looking at work a little bit more closely, reading books on it, and came across a book recently written by David Bahnsen. He's actually I guess you'd call him like a financial expert and investment expert, but his book called Full Time, I finished it in the last, a few weeks or so, and in that book, he cited frequently a lady by the name of Dorothy Sayers, and I wasn't familiar with her at all, didn't really know who she was, what else she had written, and I was curious to know why was he citing her so frequently and so positively, and extensive quoting her as well. So I looked her up, and come to find out, while she technically didn't write a book on work, she did speak about it often and had some pretty strong opinions on it as well. And the article that I want to interact with on this podcast that she wrote was found on the C.S. Lewis Institute website, and it's called Why Work. And interestingly enough, Dorothy Sayers, she was an author of mystery novels, kind of like detective series. And some people think maybe she kind of put that whole genre on the map, kind of got it going and interest really driven in it. I did come across some other information about her that says she sparked up a friendship with C.S. Lewis by writing him kind of a fan mail letter, and then the two became friends or acquaintances via that. So she had an extensive writing history. She's writing probably mid-40s or so, and her article that I'm going to be referencing, she writes kind of in the middle of and heading out of World War II. And that frames the entire article for her. And the reason why she's writing is because she's concerned that the country is going to go back to the pre-war work mentality, where it was primarily consumption and materialistic. And so she's thinking, okay, so we learned some lessons during the war. Coming out of that war, are we going to return back to where we were, or are we going to remember those lessons? So you'll notice too, this is a brand new introduction that I'm speaking on here, because when I originally recorded the podcast, I was mobile and the microphone had some static issues or some interference issues or something. I'm not really sure. So I'm going to keep the original. Actually, I'm going to delete the original introduction and replace it with this one, kind of setting up the article for you. And then as you notice, as you go along, you're going to hear some static every now and then. I tried to add some filters to it to get that cleaned up as best I could, but it's still there. So just bear with me. I didn't want to re-record the whole episode. It's going to run, once this introduction is added to it, it'll probably be about 40 minutes or so. But I think it's helpful. It's helpful for understanding work. It's helpful for reframing our understanding of what work is, and definitely our attitudes towards it. So without further ado, we'll take a look at the article that she wrote, see how it applies to us today. So let's kick it off here. I want to read basically the introductory paragraph because it is very good. It kind of lays the groundwork for the angle that she was coming at. And you'll hear her reference the war a lot. So what she has in mind here is World War II. And I'm going to draw some parallels as we go to our modern day with what she's talking about, and kind of point out that we're basically reliving the exact time period that she was in as it relates to work. And you'll see what I mean here as we go along. So without further ado, let's jump in. Let's read this first paragraph or so, and then we'll kind of go through her article here. It's, maybe 6 pages printed front and back, so that would be 12 total pages, but I'm not going to read it all. We'll just pull out what's necessary and maybe thought-provoking. So introductory paragraph, quote, I've already on a previous occasion spoken at some length on the subject of work and vocation. What I urged then was a thoroughgoing revolution in our whole attitude to work. I asked that it should be looked upon not as a necessary drudgery to be undergone for the purpose of making money, but as a way of life in which the nature of man should find its proper exercise and delight, and so fulfill itself to the glory of God. That it should, in fact, be thought of as creative activity undertaken for the love of the work itself, and that man, made in God's image, should make things as God makes them, for the sake of doing well a thing that is well worth doing. So there we go. There's kind of, I mean, that lets you know right out of the gate that she is a profound thinker on the subject of work. And she's also doing exactly what we were doing in our podcast by tying in work with the image of God. This is why in our first couple of episodes, episode 1, we went over creation, kind of some different theories on origins. And then we went into the image of God and we laid some foundational thoughts there, what that actually means. And all along, what I wanted to do is then next go to work, kind of show the relationship that image of God has with work before we jumped into what the world is trying to do from an evolutionary viewpoint in destroying work and destroying man. Okay. So what Dorothy Sayers is doing here is she is tying work and actually our love for work with man and woman being created in the image of God, which we don't always do. We do exactly what she says. We do it as a necessary drudgery. We do it as a way to get money. We do it as a way to pay our bills. We do it as a way to put food on the table, but that's the wrong perspective. We ought to be working for the love of the work itself. And I, hopefully, in our main podcast episode, I'm going to help unpack what work is, because I think we've got a misunderstanding about this. We have traded work for employment and equated the two together, and I don't think that's necessarily helpful. So as her article goes on, we'll summarize the next little bit here, but what she's going to do is she wants to change the entire framework of work in her era, in her day. And the reason is because as a result of World War II, they had come out of a time of consumerism, where they were spending tons of money, basically traded in, and I'll show you this in just a second. She goes into great detail about what this means, but where they do like what we do today. You know, they may buy the latest TV, not because they need a TV, but because the technology changed. Or they may, rather than recycling and holding on to things that could be fixed or repaired or maybe needed later on, we just completely disregard it altogether. And what the wartime mentality caused was conservation. Rather than living out that consumerism, they had to conserve their goods. They had to conserve, put things back. They weren't sure where the next meal or so was going to come from, or how tight things were going to be, or where the next twist or turn in the war may take them. So she was lamenting the fact that coming out of the war, they would forget all about that and go right back into consumerism. So listen to this quote. This is a money quote right here. A society in which consumption has to be artificially stimulated in order to keep production going is a society founded on trash and waste. And such a society is a house built upon sand. Now let's think about this for a second. What she's actually saying is that if you have a society that's simply built on consumption, it's a house of cards. It's a house built on sand. And that's exactly where we find ourselves today. Our entire market, whether you want to talk about it being internal to the United States or external to the United States and goods that we import, the entire thing is built around not necessity, but want, but desire and consumption. It's not built on we need a new TV. We don't need a TV at all. And it's not built on we need a new car. We don't need a new car at all. We can get by with an old car. But it's built on the fact that it plants desires within us to want to go out and buy things. It's a consumeristic mindset. And by the way, I wasn't meaning to touch on this, but I will mention there was I think it was PBS documentary. I may be wrong about who produced it, but it was Sigmund Freud's nephew. And Sigmund Freud's nephew was a master at propaganda. And there's an entire documentary series that talked about in the early 1900s how this propaganda related to marketing and advertisement for goods. And they would actually target and market people to go buy goods they didn't need but that they now had a unknown want or desire for. And so that's where we're living at now. We're living in all of these all of this. If you just drive down any city, you're not going to necessarily see places that are manufacturing goods. You're going to see places that are selling goods. And that's a huge problem. And Dorothy Sayers knew it was a problem in her day. It's just as much a problem in our day. Let me flip through here and see what else I've marked out. We've got, like I mentioned, in her day, in the wartime era, people were conserving. They were mending clothes. They were maybe saving scrap metal or bottles to reuse. They were doing all of these things that they hadn't done prior to the war. And that now her chief concern was coming out of that. They were going to get right back into the consumption model that they'd left. And she was absolutely right. And she quotes, just quoting her here in some of the summary time period stuff that we're dealing with her. She says, "We have had to learn the bitter lesson that in all the world there are only two sources of real wealth: the fruit of the earth and the labor of men. And to estimate work not by the money it brings to the producer, but by the worth of the thing that is made." Now think about this in our modern time. Do we value the thing that is made? In fact, do we even value the fruit of the earth? Do we value the labor of men? I would argue no. What we've done is we've so compromised ourselves for cheap goods that can be mass produced that they have no inherent value whatsoever. They break regularly. They're made of poor quality, poor materials, and we don't even care because we think, well, when this iPhone or this widget or whatever breaks because it's made of cheap plastic or cheap metal, well, we'll just go get something new. We don't value the labor that's put into these things. And it's tragic. And it's going to come back to haunt us. One thing that I want to point out in drawing the parallel with our own day is, I'll read this, as I was alluding to, when the war is over, she was concerned they would go right back where they were. Here's what she says. When the war is over, are we likely and do we want to keep this attitude to work and the results of work? Or are we preparing and do we want to go back to our old habits of thought? Because I believe that on our answer to this question, the whole economic future of society will depend. Namely, will they go back to their consumption ways, or will they stick with conservation? And what struck me when I read this was how we treated our economy during COVID. Because we had shelves that were empty. We had people that were going out and buying toilet paper for whatever reason. I have no idea. No one else can still figure this out. But the shelves were empty of that. And I remember in April of 2020, I'm going to a grocery store. Thankfully, I wasn't in need of meat and cheese or eggs or anything, but the entire shelf was empty in a major supermarket. It was just completely empty. And so remember, too, that we also had categories that were created for us for the first time of essential worker versus non-essential worker. Well, if we're to value labor, the way that Dorothy Sayers is saying, why would we ever allow a category of a non-essential worker? That devalues the human, that devalues the work. And as we've already talked about, that work, the work that we do, is tied to our nature, is tied to us being made in the image of God. So you see, what actually was happening during COVID is we were not simply devaluing a product, we were devaluing the worker because we have devalued the image of God. So Dorothy Sayers, when she's making this connection with war in her day, I wanted to make the connection with COVID in our day, because we have gone, after 5 years post-COVID, we largely have forgotten about it. We're back to normal. We're back into the same consumption mindset that we had before. Nobody's thinking about, well, it would just take one more disaster or one more virus or something like that, and the supply chain will be broken once again, because we rely globally. We've not yet got it ingrained in our minds to look local, nor to produce our own goods to some extent. This next page here, I won't read any of this, but she's basically just summarizing what I just said, or basically expanding on what I just said about the consumption model that they were living in pre and post-war. Going on a little bit here, and I'm mobile. I'm in my truck today, so if you hear horns or air conditioners or whatever. I'm going on a little bit here to the next page or so. she's talking about, after the war, they will again be urged to consume and waste. I thought that was profound, and I wrote a little note here. If you guys remember, hopefully I have this correct, but after 9/11, after the Twin Towers were attacked, whatever your views on that may be, did George Bush come out and was asked, what do we need to do as a country? What do we need to do, individually? How do we respond to this? Did he not tell us to go out and shop, go out to our stores and spend money? I may have that wrong. Somebody can comment somewhere if I've got this wrong. I don't have the quote pull up or anything, but that's what Dorothy Sayers is saying here. In her day, they were gonna be urged to go out and spend more and to consume more post-war. Unless we change, quoting her again, unless we change our attitude, or rather, unless we keep hold of the new attitude forced upon us by the logic of war, we shall again be bamboozled by our vanity, indolence, and greed into keeping the squirrel cage of wasteful economy turning. And that is exactly where we are. That we are told that we're creating jobs, that we're doing all of these things. Meanwhile, we don't value labor. We don't value the thing that's produced. We are doing this for money, to make money, and to spend less money. The government wants us to spend more money. Individually, we want to spend less money, so we buy cheaper goods. We buy fruit and food that is mass produced. The living conditions of the animals that we buy meats from is absolutely horrendous. Just look up a documentary on this. Look up anything that Joel Salatin was in documentary-wise 10 to 15 years ago, and you'll see the conditions that these animals were living in. But we've sacrificed good quality conditions for cheap food, cheap products. And then Sayers is saying here, we need to preserve the wartime habit of valuing work instead of money. The point is, she says, do we want to? I don't think we do that now. I don't think we value work. I think we're much more interested in valuing money. I mean, I do this myself. I don't particularly enjoy the job that I go to. I do it because it puts money in the bank and puts food on the table. But she's going to cause us to think, Dorothy Sayers is going to cause us to think, wait a second, maybe we should do the job that we're gifted at, or the work that we're gifted at and that we love, not so much for what money that it can bring, but for the satisfaction that it brings to our soul. That's contra to the work model that we have today, by the way. Here's what she says. This is going to be a little bit longer quote. The habit of thinking about work as something one does to make money is so ingrained in us that we can scarcely imagine what a revolutionary change it would be to think about it instead in terms of the work done. To do so would mean taking the attitude of mind we reserve for our unpaid work. Think about this now. Our hobbies, our leisure interests, the things we make and do for pleasure, and making that the standard of all of our judgments about things and people. We should ask of an enterprise not will it pay, but is it good? Of a man, not what does he make, but what is his work worth? Of goods, not can we induce people to buy them, but are they useful things well made? Of employment, not how much a week, but will it exercise my faculties to the utmost? Now that's profound. That radically changes our work. And I especially like the fact how she related our work attitudes to what we might do in our hobbies or leisure time. Because I'll use myself for example. I don't want to say, somebody that's working on a model car or carving something out of wood, that because they love that necessarily should be the work that they do in life. That could be. Maybe there's value there. Maybe there's some things that can be done and presented to people in a way for something that they need. But the attitude is what she's getting at here, how we treat those things. So in my case, I can go out on our farm and I can take care of sheep, or I can, though I don't like it on hot days, to weed eat, or I can go cut firewood, or I can go take care of chickens, or build a structure, or build a coop, or move an animal from one area to another. And I can do that all day long. And I have delight in that. And I would actually argue that that's not hobby, that's actually work. I am doing an effort that's going to have a benefit for me and for my family as it pertains to food, or as it pertains to some sort of necessity in life. And that attitude that I have isn't one of drudgery that I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, here I've got to go outside and I've got to go feed the chickens today. No, we've got a trade-off. We've got a relationship. I feed them. They provide us with eggs every day. It's a delight. But the approach that we have towards work, and you guys know this. I see the memes. I've seen the GIFs. You guys know this. That Sunday night where you're dreading getting up and going to work the next morning on that Monday, and then you just pull yourself, you will yourself through the Monday, and then everybody celebrates Wednesday because it's hump day. We're halfway to Friday, and then Friday comes and we say we made it, and we're not actually happy till we're walking out of the office on that Friday. But then we've got Saturday and Sunday, and then we wonder, why did the weekend go by so fast? It's because we've got an attitude towards our work that's of drudgery. We don't particularly like it. We don't particularly want to go there. And what I'm going to argue is, in this podcast episode here, is we've got to change that attitude, first of all. We've got to change our attitude towards one of delight for the work. And maybe what we need to do is take a new approach at what work actually is. I don't think, and based on the stuff that I've read from multiple authors, and we'll maybe mention this in the main podcast show, not only David Bahnsen, he takes a little bit different perspective, but someone who you wouldn't think that would write on work, a homesteader, Rory Groves, Rory Groves, wrote a book called Durable Trades, where he went back and he looked at what trades, what jobs basically were long lasting, and were family centered. So they actually built their entire economy around the family for hundreds of years. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that this model got shaken and actually destroyed. So we'll look at those things in the main podcast episode. But the point here being is that not only do we need to change our attitude towards work of one of delight to the glory of God, but maybe we also need to look at what we define as work. Okay. Just finishing up here a little bit. Let's see. She does go on to lament the way that churches have handled work. And I've seen this as well. And without going into too much detail down the rabbit trail, she's going to point out that the churches largely have created this false division between the sacred and the secular. And we know, if you're familiar with Martin Luther at all and the Reformation and the doctrine of vocation that kind of came out of that Luther more or less developed, we'll say, and then that Calvin kind of built upon, the Puritans kind of worked through as well. It was to break down this sacred secular divide. But I know that I've experienced this as well. I was talking with a pastor, my own pastor, years ago, former pastor, I should say, and I was talking about how I had a Bible study at work, and that I was trying to figure out what my mission, what my role or purpose was at work, but I was finding a purpose in this Bible study. And then he made the distinction of, yeah, it's tough when you live when you have a secular job, to kind of do those sorts of things. But what Dorothy Sayers, what Martin Luther, what the Protestant work ethic, what the doctrine of vocation would say is that this sacred secular divide is a false division, and that actually we can serve the Lord no matter what it is that we do. And that's what Luther's main argument was. So this secular sacred divide doesn't really exist. And the church has pushed that to the fact that when we go to our jobs, our 9 to 5 jobs, we don't think that it's doing any value to build God's kingdom. We don't think that it has any gospel value whatsoever. And that the only thing that does is when I'm doing things at church. So if I'm at church, even if I'm sweeping floors, or if I am going door to door to minister the gospel, if I'm teaching a Sunday school or teaching little kids, or just simply watching kids in a daycare, changing diapers at a church nursery, that has value. But when I go to work and sit at a computer and work in an Excel spreadsheet, that doesn't. And that's the attitude that Sayers is going to say the church has been wrong on, and it's caused men to hate their work. She goes on, and as she's kind of wrapping up her article, she's going to point out a couple propositions. And let me go and see if I can read what it is that she's wanting to do here. She's wanting to change the Christian understanding of work. So she wants to put before the readers 2 or 3 propositions that arise out of the doctrinal position which she states at the beginning of this article, and that's namely that work is the natural exercise and function of man, the creature who is made in the image of Creator. Okay, So she wants to use that as a foundation, and rightly so, I might add, to kind of lay forth a couple propositions here. And the first proposition she says is that work is not primarily a thing one does to live, but the thing one lives to do. Now think about that, because in our society, we have all been taught that our work is what we do to live. We go to our 9 to 5 jobs to make money so that we can live outside of that 9 to 5 job, so that we can enjoy ourselves outside of that, so that we can have a life outside of work. What Dorothy is saying here is that we actually need to change that so that our work is what we live to do. That is a radical departure from what we've all been taught, what we've all been fed. She goes on here and says our work should be the expression of the worker's faculties, the thing in which he finds spiritual, mental, and bodily satisfaction, and the medium in which he offers himself to God. We definitely don't do that. In fact, I was just thinking last while I was reading this and working through this article a little bit, even someone who we might respect, highly respect, Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs, okay? You guys may have remembered that show where he went around and he'd go to jobs that were just rough. I mean, they were rough jobs. They were dirty, they were smelly, stinky, and he tags along with them and says, "This is a dirty job," Well, he's been a speaker since then, kind of used that to platform himself, which is fine. And what he's telling kids, what students, college students, high school students, whatever, is that, hey, don't go find something that you like doing. Just go find something that you can do. Go get a job. Any job. Now, I probably got that wrong, and there's probably some nuance in the things that he's saying. But just simply paraphrasing, I don't think that's exactly right. I think what we need to do is find a job, and again, we're going to define this hopefully later, but find work that we can do that actually exercises our faculties, stimulates us, in which we find satisfaction, not just physically, not just mentally, but spiritually. Profound, I think. She lists a couple consequences for that. They're pretty extensive. I don't want to read all of this, but she says, the consequence of this first proposition is, of course, you're going to think about profits and I'll never get this. Remuneration. Gee whiz, how much you get paid? Don't pay attention. I'm butchering these syllables here, but the profits and how much we get paid. Okay. I'm sure as soon as the podcast ends, I'll say it perfectly fine. But reading through it right now, it's escaped me. Whatever. We've all got it fixed in our heads that the proper end of work is to be paid for, to produce a return in profits or payment to the worker which fully or more than compensates the effort he puts into it. But if this proposition is true, I'm quoting her, this does not follow at all. So long as society provides the worker with sufficient return in real wealth to enable him to carry on the work properly, then he has his reward. For his work is the measure of his life, and the satisfaction is found in the fulfillment of his own nature and in contemplation of the perfection of his work. In other words, if we followed her consequence, it would bring up the issue of, well, if I was going to do this for the satisfaction of my mind, body, and soul, how much is that going to pay me? However, the payment wouldn't be so much in dollars, but would be in the satisfaction for the work that you've actually done and accomplished. And then she says that in practice, there is the satisfaction. It's shown by the mere fact that man will put loving labor into some hobby which can never bring him economically adequate return. He is no longer bargaining with his work, but serving it, if we went on without her proposition. It is only when work has to be looked on as a means to gain that it becomes hateful. Think about that. For then, instead of a friend, it becomes an enemy, from whom tolls and contributions have to be extracted. So the minute that we put a dollar amount that we're working just for money, it makes us enemies. I'm only going to work for the money. And now it makes me an enemy of that job. And I would argue that the reason why it does that is because we know that our time has infinite value. And we know that that employer has placed a dollar amount on that time. And we know it's never going to be enough. Consequence B, she says, this is a little bit longer, but basically we need to do work that we're fitted to our nature. And then that creates an issue because the employer wants to find cheap labor, the worker wants to find a job that he's best paid for, and it creates a tension between the two. Third consequence of this proposition is that if we believe the proposition and we arranged our work and standard of values accordingly, we should we should no longer think of work as something that we hasten to get through in order to enjoy our leisure. We should look on our leisure as the period of changed rhythm that refreshed us for the delightful purpose of getting on with our work. We should resent any such restrictions as monstrous interference with the liberty of the subject. How great an upheaval of our ideas that would mean, I leave to you imagine. It would turn topsy-turvy all our notions about hours of work, rates of work, unfair competition, and all the rest of it. And we should find ourselves fighting as now only artists and members of certain professions fight for precious time in which to get on with the job, instead of fighting for precious hours saved from the job. She is absolutely right. I just said, we all look forward to this. We always look forward to the weekend. There's songs about it. Everybody's working for the weekend to get out of work. We want to take leave to get out of work. We want to take vacations to get away from work. And that's because we have a twisted understanding of what work is and the value that it should bring, not only to the glory of God, but the satisfaction that it should bring to us internally and externally, physically, spiritually, and mentally. All right, a fourth consequence. We should be fighting not for mere employment, but for the quality of the work that we do. If we were to abide in that consequence that she mentioned, it would cause us to radically change the quality of work that we do. The greatest insult which a commercial age has offered to the worker has been to rob him of all interest in the end product of the work and to force him to dedicate his life to making badly things which were not worth making. Widgets that nobody had a need for, but now suddenly everybody wants. What value does that have? Okay, now her second proposition, it kind of touches on Luther's vocation, doctrine of vocation, a little bit. She says it directly concerns Christians as such, and it is this. It is the business of the church to recognize that secular vocation, as such, is sacred. Quote, the church must concern herself not only with such questions as the just price and proper working conditions, she must concern herself with seeing that work itself is such as a human being can perform without degradation, that no one is required by economic or any other considerations to devote himself to work that is contemptible, soul-destroying, or harmful. Okay, so she's touching on that secular and sacred divide, and she's saying there are some limits to work. This is a money quote here. In nothing has the church so lost her hold on reality as in her failure to understand and respect the secular vocation. She has allowed work and religion to become separate departments, and is astonished to find that, as a result, the secular work of the world has turned to purely selfish and destructive ends, and that the greater part of the world's intelligent workers have become irreligious, or at least uninterested in religion. The church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him not to be drunk and disorderly in his leisure hours, and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this: the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. And she goes on here, but this later quote is worth mentioning as well. Let the church remember this, that every maker and worker is called to serve God in his profession or trade, not outside of it. The only Christian work is good work, well done. And then finally here another quote. God is not served by technical incompetence, and incompetence and untruth always result when the secular vocation is treated as a thing alien to religion. Man, so good. All right, her third proposition, I think this is her last one as well, then we'll wrap this thing up. She says, this brings me to my third proposition, and this may sound to you the most revolutionary of all. It is this: the worker's first duty is to serve the work. Now, this is a little bit confusing if you were to read this. What she's saying is that we have all been taught that in our jobs, we are serving other people, okay? So we've got the service industry, right? Or we say that state workers, government workers are servants. Thank you for your service. They're public servants. That's the word, the phrase we use, public servants. And what she's going to go on to say here is the trouble is that we have separated the second commandment love your neighbor as yourself, from the first commandment, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And she says when you do that, you create an imbalanced work. You create a work that is irreligious. Much of the present trouble and disillusionment have come from putting the second commandment before the first, she says. Okay, now she goes through that, touches on some not really propositions or consequences from that, but she's just saying, hey, we've got, what we have to do is we have to serve the work itself. And when we do that, we'll ultimately be serving the Lord. And here's her maybe a summary quote for us here on this particular proposition. The only true way of serving the community is to be truly in sympathy with the community, to be oneself part of the community, and then to serve the work without giving the community another thought. Then the work will endure because it will be true to itself. It is the work that serves the community. The busyness of the worker is to serve the work. Here's another little quote here. Where we have become confused is in mixing up the ends to which our work is put with the way in which the work is done. The end of the work will be decided by our religious outlook. As we are, so we make. As we are, so we make. Sorry. It is the business, quoting her again here, sorry. It is the business of religion to make us Christian people, and then our work will naturally be turned to Christian ends, because our work is the expression of ourselves. But the way in which the work is done is governed by no sanction except the good of the work itself. That's so good. So good. Okay, we're on to the last page here, just summarizing again this article, which is well worth reading. You can go to the C.S. Lewis Institute and find this in its entirety. Just search Dorothy Sayers and the article Why Work. And so here's her last paragraph, the last quote too as well, and we'll wrap this podcast up. And again, what I want to do is I'm just kind of laying some foundational thoughts here for the upcoming podcast on work. We're probably going to have to do some other notes from the Pulpit's edition to kind of flesh out a little bit more about this work concept. Especially, I want to contrast the authors that I mentioned earlier. I want to contrast what David Bahnsen is focused on in his book with what Rory Groves is focused on in his book. And here you have two Christians that are coming at work maybe from the same angle, but arriving at different conclusions. All right, wrapping up Dorothy Sayers here. What is required is the she's going to quote someone here. I'm so sorry. She is quoting an author, and his name is Jacques Maritain, I believe is how you would say that. I don't really know much about him, but this is his quote. What is required is the perfect practical discrimination between the end pursued by the workman and the end to be served by the work, so that the workman may work for his wages, but the work be controlled and set in being only in relation to its own proper good and nowise in relation to the wages earned. This is so contrary to what we do. So that the artist may work for any and every human intention he likes, but the work taken by itself be performed and constructed for its own proper beauty alone. I mean, this is so contrary to what we do. We've got the corporate ladder that we want to climb. We've been told this. We're ingrained this. We want an entry-level job and we want to work our way up to middle management or whatever. It is ingrained in us that once we start, we continue to work and we're working for the money. Now, this isn't to say everybody. I know some people love their job and they're in it because of the product and the goods that they produce and they value those goods and services. I'm just talking in generalities as a whole here. Okay. And then finally, one final thing from Dorothy Sayers in this article, or perhaps we may put it more shortly still. If work is to find its right place in the world, it is the duty of the church to see to it that the work serves God and that the worker serves the work. You see that relationship there? Okay, hopefully this is helpful. Go read the whole article for yourself. This is Notes from the Pulpit. Be sure to catch us next time. We should be coming to you maybe this weekend. I don't know. We may post something maybe early Monday if we can get the podcast recorded on work and get my co-host focused a little bit on that subject, which she actually likes and enjoys to talk about. But thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.